April 13th, 1972, and the city of An Loc sits 65 miles north of Saigon as the provincial capital of Bin Long Province, garrisoned by 7,000 soldiers from the 5th ARVN Division and home to 15,000 civilians in a city that occupies a strategic position astride Route 13, the main highway from Cambodia to Saigon. This makes An Loc both critical to South Vietnam's defence and dangerously vulnerable to attack from communist sanctuaries across the border, and the coming battle will determine whether Vietnamization can work or whether South Vietnam will collapse under the weight of North Vietnamese conventional assault. This is the fourth year of Vietnamization, President Nixon's policy designed to withdraw American combat troops while strengthening South Vietnamese forces so they can defend themselves, and while American advisors remain in country with air support, continuing to flow from bases across Southeast Asia, the infantry. Fighting and dying is now South Vietnamese because they must hold or watch their country fall. 2 weeks earlier, on March 30th, North Vietnam launched the Easter Offensive with 14 divisions and over 120,000 troops equipped with Soviet tanks and heavy artillery in a conventional invasion that crosses the DMZ and sweeps from Cambodia, designed to shatter ARVN forces and prove Vietnamization has failed completely. The offensive strikes 3 fronts simultaneously at Quang Tri in the north, Kon Tum in the Central Highlands, and here at An Loc in Bin Long Province, with the NVA committing massive forces because they expect quick victory after watching ARVN units collapse during Operation Lam Son 719 in Laos last year. The North Vietnamese are confident their modern weapons, including Soviet tanks, long-range artillery, and SA-7 missiles combined with superior numbers, will deliver victory, but they are catastrophically wrong about what awaits them at An Loc. An Loc will hold for 66 days from April 13th to June 18th, with the 5th ARVN Division fighting the finest battle in South Vietnamese history as they face tanks and artillery and human waves while surrounded and supplied only by parachute drops, holding in rubble and fighting from ruins while refusing to surrender even as their city is systematically destroyed around them. They will win with American airpower, providing B-52 strikes, and with courage born from knowing defeat means losing everything. And in holding, they save Saigon from immediate threat while proving Vietnamization can work and demonstrating South Vietnam can defend itself when properly supported. This is the Battle of An Loc, 66 days under siege with 10,000 NVA killed and the city destroyed but never surrendered. The victory that changed the war trajectory and proved South Vietnamese soldiers could stand against a modern conventional army. The build-up and preparation. Intelligence reports during March 1972 indicate major NVA build-up north of An Loc as the 5th NVA Division, the 7th NVA Division, and the 9th VC Division concentrate with tank regiments and artillery regiments, bringing over 30,000 troops into position, while moving toward An Loc from their sanctuaries in Cambodia. The reports proved disturbingly accurate, confirming that the NVA are preparing a major offensive with An Loc as their primary target, and the ARVN commanders know they have very little time to prepare for the storm that's coming. The 5th ARVN Division commander is Brigadier General Le Van Hung, a 42-year-old professional soldier and paratrooper with extensive experience fighting since the French War, and he knows both his enemy and his soldiers well enough to understand what is required. He prepares his defence methodically by reinforcing An Loc with the 8th Regiment and the 7th Regiment along with artillery and armour, while he stockpiles ammunition, food and medical supplies in quantities he hopes will be sufficient. He fortifies positions throughout the city with engineers digging bunkers and stringing wire around the perimeter, doing everything possible within the limited time available, even though he knows it will not be enough, because An Loc sits in a valley surrounded by hills and jungle, with multiple approaches and a large perimeter requiring more troops than he has available. American advisors are present in the city, with senior advisor Colonel William Miller coordinating air support including B-52 strikes, tactical air and helicopter resupply operations, because while the Americans cannot fight on the ground after the withdrawal of combat troops, air power remains the decisive advantage that will determine this battle's outcome. The NVA will learn through bitter experience that tanks and artillery cannot win battles without air superiority, and the Americans will teach them this lesson through the systematic application of overwhelming firepower from the sky. April 7th brings the offensive closer to An Loc, when the town of Loc Ninh falls 20 miles north, after the garrison is overrun by NVA forces using T-54 tanks for the first time in this offensive, with Loc Ninh falling in 2 days of desperate fighting that opens the road to An Loc and demonstrates to the defenders what they will soon face. April 9th marks the beginning of direct attacks as NVA 130mm guns begin shelling An Loc from long-range positions in the hills, destroying buildings and killing civilians in sustained bombardment that continues daily with increasing intensity as the NVA prepare the battlefield by softening defences and creating fear before launching the ground assault that everyone knows is coming. April 13th, the tanks come. At 0530 hours on April 13th, 1972, dawn breaks over An Loc with grey, overcast sky threatening rain during monsoon season, while shelling intensifies dramatically with 130mm guns and 122mm rockets and mortars, creating a barrage heavier than anything on previous days that shakes the city until buildings collapse with walls crumbling and roofs caving in on civilians, hiding in packed underground shelters where children cry and adults pray. The soldiers man their positions with weapons ready because they know with absolute certainty that today the ground assault comes and the real battle begins, and at 0700 hours the barrage lifts with sudden ominous silence before the sound of diesel engines grows steadily louder with tracks clanking metal on metal in the unmistakable noise of many tanks approaching. The defenders see T-54 Soviet tanks emerging through smoke and dust as dozens advance from the north in professional formation, coming through the rubber plantation where planted rows provide natural corridors that tank commanders exploit while thousands of infantry follow behind using tanks as mobile cover as the NVA 5th Division launches its assault with overwhelming force. The ARVN defenders open fire immediately with M48 Patton tanks engaging at maximum effective range of 1,000 metres, using their 90mm guns where superior American optics and fire control systems give them the advantage they need, and the high-velocity armour-piercing shells scream downrange at supersonic speed, before impacting T-54 hulls, where some rounds penetrate through shaped charge jets that burn through Soviet armour, causing stricken tanks to brew up with internal fires that cook off ammunition in catastrophic secondary explosions powerful enough to launch turrets skyward, while the crews inside die instantly. But more tanks keep coming in seemingly endless waves, with 30 becoming 40, and then more as the NVA demonstrate they can afford these losses because they brought overwhelming numerical superiority, pushing forward relentlessly through the fire and destruction with determination that is both impressive and terrifying to defenders. The ARVN infantry watch the approaching armour while gripping M72 Laws, the American-supplied disposable rocket launchers with 66mm warheads that are effective against armour, but only at dangerously close range where the soldiers must expose themselves to enemy fire, and the trained law operators wait with forced patience while these terrifying machines grow closer with engines roaring and tracks clanking, because they know that firing too early means rockets lose velocity and penetration power. The tanks reach 250 metres where soldiers can see individual details on the hulls and can hear the voices of NVA infantry following behind, and when the order finally comes to fire, the law backblast proves enormous with flame shooting backward from each tube as rockets streak out trailing white smoke toward their targets. Some impacts achieve penetration with shaped charges burning through armour to disable tanks that shudder to a stop while beginning to burn, but other rockets glance off harmlessly because T-54s mount 100mm frontal armour, while the law penetrates only 80mm under ideal conditions, making frontal shots marginal at best while side shots work much better. The infantry learns this critical lesson through brutal combat education, understanding through deadly experience that they must aim for vulnerable flanks and rear sections where armour is weaker, concentrating their limited fire on these weak points until more T-54s are hit and disabled, with columns of thick black smoke rising from burning diesel fuel. But the NVA infantry keeps closing relentlessly, with thousands of soldiers charging forward behind the tanks, while wearing khaki uniforms and carrying AK-47 rifles that they fire continuously as they advance, and whenever ARVN law operators emerge from cover to engage tanks, the supporting NVA infantry immediately shoots at them with concentrated rifle fire, demonstrating well-coordinated combined arms tactics that reveal this is professional conventional mechanized assault following Soviet military doctrine rather than improvised guerrilla warfare. The ARVN 5th Division fights with desperate intensity as every defensive position engages the enemy simultaneously, with M60 machine guns firing belt-fed ammunition where trained gunners use disciplined fireburst to conserve barrels, while maintaining volume that cuts down enemy infantry by the dozens, and then by the scores, though thousands of replacements keep advancing. Recoilless rifles engage the tanks with 106mm weapons, where the enormous backblast gives away firing positions immediately, but the weapons prove devastatingly effective when high explosive anti-tank rounds strike, true and penetrate armour, with brave crews exposing themselves repeatedly to aim and fire and reload, until some are inevitably killed, at which point other soldiers immediately take over the weapons to continue the fight. Artillery provides critical fire support, with the 3rd ARVN Artillery Regiment fielding 36 105mm howitzers that fire direct fire missions over open sites, which violates normal artillery doctrine but proves absolutely necessary under these circumstances. The guns are positioned forward in the city close enough that gunners can actually see their targets, including both tanks and infantry concentrations, engaging them using simple procedure of identify target, load high explosive shell, aim carefully and fire. The 105mm shell is not specifically designed for anti-tank work, but at extremely close range of 500 meters or 300 meters, the shell's violent impact proves effective because the massive concussion damages tanks by breaking tracks and shattering optics and destroying external equipment, leaving tanks' mobility killed and blind while stopped in place where infantry can approach, and finish them with close-range law shots aimed at vulnerable side armour. This coordination between artillery and infantry is improvised under fire through desperate necessity rather than being taught in doctrine, but it proves remarkably effective as the ARVN learns combined arms warfare through combat's harsh crucible. Adapting tactics to survive, the battle rages continuously from 0700 hours until noon, in 5 solid hours of unrelenting violence, as the NVA push into Northern An Loc, taking blocks and buildings in street-by-street fighting, while the ARVN fall back in controlled tactical retreat, making the NVA pay dearly in blood for every metre gained and every building captured, as the city is transformed into rubble under artillery, tank guns and law rockets. Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Van Dinh commands the 3rd Regiment in the sector, receiving the hardest hits from the main NVA thrust, and he moves constantly between defensive positions under continuous fire to personally direct defences, while calling for artillery support and repositioning units as situations develop. He is struck twice by shrapnel, with one fragment embedding in his left arm, while another tears into his right leg, causing significant bleeding. But he categorically refuses medical evacuation and stays on the line to continue commanding and fighting and bleeding alongside his men, demonstrating personal courage and leadership that will earn him both promotion and decoration, but more importantly earns him the profound respect and loyalty of soldiers who follow him, because he leads from the front and shares every risk. At noon, the first American airstrikes arrive as F-4. Phantom jets scream overhead at supersonic speed before dropping 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs that create massive explosions with 30-foot craters, hitting NVA concentrations and destroying tanks by flipping them with blast overpressure, while killing infantry by dozens through shockwave effects alone. The airpower makes immediate difference and changes battle momentum as the NVA advance slows and stops while survivors frantically seek cover. But more aircraft continue arriving as a 7. Corsair attack aircraft appear overhead, slower propeller-driven planes that prove deadly because they carry heavier weapons loads and possess more fuel for longer time on station. The A-7s establish orbit patterns while striking targets as directed by ground controllers, with ARVN units having American advisors equipped with radios who talk directly to pilots and direct strikes with improving precision, and this integration of air power into ground battle creates a devastatingly effective combination. By evening, the NVA control the northern quarter of An Loc, representing roughly 1/3 of the city's total area, but critically the main defensive structures still hold, including the vital airfield and the command post, and the artillery positions representing essential infrastructure. The 5th ARVN Division has not broken despite tremendous pressure, and General Hung reorganises his forces by pulling back to tighter perimeter and consolidating strength, deliberately abandoning some positions to concentrate forces more effectively along a shorter defensive line. He prepares for the next assault, knowing it comes tomorrow and every day thereafter, because the NVA will keep attacking until they break through or exhaust themselves, and his division must keep holding because withdrawal means losing An Loc, which means Saigon faces immediate threat. American casualties from this first day include 2 advisors killed, Captain Mark Smith and First Lieutenant Thomas Brown, who fought alongside ARVN directing airstrikes and coordinating artillery while exposing themselves to observe targets until they were struck by artillery fire. 4 additional advisors sustain wounds but categorically refuse evacuation because their injuries are minor and they determine their duty as here with the ARVN forces, who depend on their expertise, demonstrating remarkable bravery of advisors who volunteer knowing the risks to help ARVN win this crucial battle. The siege intensifies. April 14th brings renewed NVA assaults from multiple directions with coordinated attacks from north and east and west designed to fix ARVN forces in place, while preventing reinforcement of threatened sectors, putting enormous pressure on defenders who find themselves fighting in every sector at once. They managed to hold, but only barely, with casualties mounting at alarming rates and ammunition consumption, reaching massive levels, making immediate resupply absolutely critical. But a severe problem has developed because Route 13, the vital highway from Saigon representing the only ground line of communication, has been completely cut by NVA forces who control the road and ambush any convoy. When an ARVN relief column attempted fighting its way up Route 13 to reach the besieged city, it was ambushed with devastating effect and destroyed with catastrophic losses, including tanks and armoured personnel carriers and trucks along with hundreds of casualties, proving the road is closed and that An Loc is now completely isolated, with all future supply forced to come exclusively by air. The Americans rapidly organised comprehensive airlift using C-130 Hercules transports that fly repeated missions from Saigon, loaded with ammunition and food and medicine and fuel, but the C-130s cannot land because the airfield remains under constant artillery fire, forcing them to drop all supplies by parachute while flying at 1,500 feet, where anti-aircraft fire cannot reach as effectively. The C-130s push supply pallets out through cargo doors while parachutes deploy and supplies descend toward the city, with some landing inside ARVN-controlled territory where they can be recovered but others landing in NVA territory where they are lost, and some parachutes fail, causing supplies to crash and be destroyed. The loss rate runs between 30 and 40%, which represents significant wastage, but enough successfully gets through to keep defense functioning and allow soldiers to continue fighting. The C-130 crews proved their extraordinary courage by continuing to fly these dangerous missions through intense fire, including SA-7 missiles and conventional anti-aircraft artillery, with several aircraft taking serious damage and one being shot down with total loss of crew. But despite losses, the flights continue without pause, arriving daily over An Loc, and sometimes multiple times per day, because supplies absolutely must get through and An Loc depends completely on these aerial deliveries. The crews know the terrible risks but fly anyway because that is their mission, and they will deliver or die trying, and their sacrifice keeps An Loc supplied when it would otherwise be forced to surrender within days from lack of ammunition and food. April 15th sees the NVA bringing substantial additional artillery to firing positions surrounding An Loc, increasing total strength to well over 100 guns, including 130mm and 122mm and 100mm pieces in the heaviest concentration of artillery firepower employed anywhere during the war. These massed guns fire essentially continuously day and night with thousands of rounds daily in systematic bombardment, designed to destroy the city block by block until An Loc is transformed into rubble and concrete dust and shattered walls, with nothing remaining intact above ground, forcing defenders to abandon the surface entirely and live underground in basements and tunnels and bunkers, because remaining on the surface means certain death. The trapped civilian population suffers beyond adequate description, with thousands caught inside because they cannot evacuate through encircling NVA forces, hiding in horribly overcrowded underground shelters that lack sanitation facilities, while possessing only limited food and strictly rationed water, and disease spreads with terrifying speed, including dysentery and cholera. The wounded cannot be evacuated to proper medical facilities, leaving overwhelmed hospitals operating in underground bunkers by candlelight without sufficient supplies, where exhausted doctors do everything possible, but their efforts prove tragically insufficient, resulting in hundreds and then thousands of deaths among civilians and soldiers who succumb to wounds or disease that would have been treatable under normal conditions. The B-52 strikes. April 16th marks a dramatic turning point as the Americans unleash the full devastating power of their B-52 strategic bombers in what are designated arc light strikes, using strategic bombers tactically to provide massive close air support from 30,000 feet. The massive 8-engine B-52s fly from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, located 3,500 miles away, requiring missions that consume 14 hours for the complete round trip, with aerial refueling over the Pacific and Thailand using KC-135 tankers before the bombers continue to their targets, flying in tight 3-aircraft cells with formation discipline from Strategic Air Command elite crews, for whom accuracy is everything. Each aircraft carries 27,000 kilograms of conventional ordnance, as 108 individual 500-pound bombs, loaded in internal bomb bays and on external wing pylons, creating combined load per cell of 81,000 kilograms and 324 bombs with destructive power beyond anything conventional forces possess, theoretically capable of destroying entire battalions if accurately targeted. The targeting proves absolutely critical because the B-52s cannot see ground from 30,000 feet and rely entirely on specific coordinates provided by ground controllers, including American advisors, and Colonel Miller and his team work constantly to identify NVA concentrations in assembly areas and artillery positions and tank parks and supply depots, radioing coordinates to 7th Air Force where missions are planned. The B-52s methodically strike NVA concentrations at all points surrounding An Loc, hitting wherever intelligence indicates the enemy is massing forces, and the strikes prove remarkably accurate with precision, steadily improving as forward air controllers gain experience. The bombs fall in carefully calculated rectangular patterns, designated as strike boxes measuring 1,000 by 2,000 meters, with everything within these boxes being utterly destroyed and pulverized through concentrated impact of hundreds of bombs, arriving almost simultaneously within seconds, as the lead aircraft releases first followed immediately by the others in perfect sequence. The explosions prove visible from An Loc even during daylight, as brilliant flashes appear on the horizon, like continuous lightning followed by rolling thunder sound, while the ground shakes and defenders watch with hearts lifted because the B-52s represent their salvation and decisive advantage the NVA cannot match, killing enemy forces before they can engage by destroying them in assembly areas before attacks can be launched. The NVA possess absolutely no effective defense because the B-52s operate at 30,000 feet, above anti-aircraft range and beyond SA-7 missile ceiling, while ZSU 57mm guns cannot elevate high enough, rendering the bombers invulnerable. The aircraft remain invisible and inaudible from ground level, providing no warning, with bombs arriving without engine noise or visual sighting or opportunity for cover in sudden catastrophic explosions that kill everything within strike boxes. The psychological impact proves as devastating as physical destruction because terrified NVA soldiers live in constant fear of the whispering death arriving without warning, unable to sleep or rest or concentrate forces without risking annihilation, forcing them to remain dispersed and constantly moving, while unrelenting stress proves unbearable for some who desert though discipline generally holds. The fear proves corrosive over time, undermining morale and destroying confidence of soldiers facing a threat they cannot defend against. The strikes occur daily with multiple cells hitting targets, sometimes 4 or 6 or 8, accumulating to dozens per week that drop over 30,000 tons around An Loc during the siege, exceeding tonnage on any previous target including Khe Sanh and Hanoi, making An Loc the most heavily bombed target in Southeast Asia. The commitment demonstrates American determination that An Loc will not fall, systematically grinding down NVA forces through attrition by killing them in assembly areas and destroying reinforcements before reaching front lines. Colonel William Miller personally coordinates every strike from his underground bunker, where he lives alongside General Hung in reinforced concrete with 3 meters overhead protection, and though the bunker is dark and damp and lit by generators with radios filling space and maps covering walls, it serves as defense nerve center. Miller maintains direct communication with 7th Air Force and tactical air coordination, and B-52 cells in flight, allowing him to call fire within minutes for troops in contact, and the B-52s respond because cells orbit over Vietnam waiting for calls, delivering ordnance within 30 minutes, creating unprecedented responsiveness. When ARVN positions are threatened, airpower responds immediately with B-52s, and tactical aircraft and helicopter gunships delivering everything available, and the system works because Miller makes it work through coordination and judgment about when to call strikes, and where to direct them, and how close they can safely impact near-friendly forces. The grinding siege, from April 21st to May 10th, 20 days of continuous combat establish brutal patterns as NVA artillery bombards, while NVA infantry assaults and ARVN defends desperately, and American airpower strikes back in exhausting siege that reduces An Loc to utter devastation, with over 90% of buildings damaged or destroyed completely, transforming the city into moonscape of rubble and craters, with nothing intact above ground, forcing defenders to live underground like moles, emerging only to fight because the surface belongs to shells and bombs. Casualties mount relentlessly as ARVN 5th Division loses half its strength with 3,500 soldiers killed or wounded, requiring constant flow of replacements, who arrive by helicopter during dangerous night flights, where some helicopters are shot down, killing crews and passengers, though most make it through to deliver replacements that keep the division combat effective if only barely. Because in this desperate siege every man matters, and every rifle counts toward defense that continues through determination. General Hung demonstrates exceptional leadership through daily walks along positions under fire, talking to soldiers and encouraging them while sharing their dangers through visible presence that builds mutual respect between commander and troops, and this is leadership of finest kind from a professional and brave officer whose soldiers follow because he asks them while leading from the front. Hung will survive this siege to continue serving until 1975 when Saigon falls, and he will commit suicide rather than surrender. But here in 1972 he fights and holds and achieves the greatest victory of his career. The civilians suffer beyond adequate description, as over 5,000 die from artillery and airstrikes that miss and disease and starvation, while survivors exist in underground bunkers that are dark and crowded and filthy with no food except what soldiers share, and no medicine for wounded who lie in darkness, where some die and are buried where they fall. The horror is biblical, yet civilians endure because humans possess infinite capacity for suffering when survival requires it, and because they have no alternative since they cannot leave or surrender. The supply drops continue with C-130 flights arriving daily as aircrews become experts through repeated missions, learning drop zones and flying precise patterns that improve accuracy and reduce loss rate from 40% to 25 to 20%, which remains significant but proves manageable to sustain defense. Without these deliveries, An Loc would fall within days, making C-130 crews unsung heroes who fly through fire while some aircraft are hit and one crashes. But flights continue because An Loc depends completely on these brave air crews. May 4th brings NVA tactics change as they begin digging approach trenches in classic siege warfare working at night, while by day ARVN and aircraft destroy trenches with fire, forcing NVA to start again in repeating pattern. The strategy is attritional, grinding down defenders until they break, and NVA commanders believe this will work because they have time and patience. But ARVN adapt by sending night patrols with small teams raiding trenches to throw grenades and kill sappers before withdrawing, and Rangers prove skilled at night operations with silent movement and quick violence that disrupts siege work and slows digging while making NVA pay for every meter excavated. May 11th, the final assault at zero. 300 hours on May 11th, the final major NVA assault begins as they commit everything remaining, launching 7th NVA Division from north, while 9th VC Division attacks from east, and 5th NVA Division assaults from west in simultaneous attacks involving over 15,000 troops supported by all remaining tanks and every artillery piece. The NVA commanders believe this maximum coordinated effort will break ARVN resistance, and An Loc will fall today. The artillery preparation proves heaviest of the entire siege, with every available gun firing continuously for 2 hours in barrage so intense that the city disappears under smoke and dust, while explosions merge into continuous roar, and defenders hunker in bunkers knowing what follows, because they have experienced it before, so they wait and check weapons and count ammunition and prepare mentally. At 0500, the barrage lifts and tanks and infantry attack with massive force as NVA surge forward in waves, numbering thousands, charging through blown gaps and climbing rubble while firing in volume that seems impossible to survive. The ARVN positions are overwhelmed in sectors where units are overrun and destroyed, allowing NVA to penetrate deep and reach the centre where defence appears collapsing. General Hung commits last reserves without hesitation, throwing airborne and rangers and everyone who can carry rifles into battle, while organising counterattacks through small unit actions where platoons fight independently with desperate need to retake positions and stop penetration. The fighting becomes savage with close range and hand-to-hand combat, as ARVN fight with courage born from desperation, because this is their country and city and families depending on protection, so they fight because there is no alternative except dying where they stand. Colonel Miller calls every aircraft in theatre, declaring emergency making, An Loc priority requiring maximum effort, and response proves immediate as Phantoms and Sky Raiders and Dragonflies and gunships converge, arriving within minutes, to see battle unfolding with NVA exposed presenting perfect targets. They attack with bombs and napalm and rockets and machine gun fire from gunships whose miniguns fire 6,000 rounds per minute, creating apocalyptic carnage among packed enemy formations. At 0800 B-52 strikes begin hitting danger close targets, with bombs falling within 500 meters of ARVN positions and closest strikes of the entire war, creating enormous risk because bombs might hit ARVN forces, but Miller makes the call accepting risk, because without strikes, NVA win, while with strikes there is chance often survives. The bombs arrive and Earth shakes violently, knocking soldiers down while debris rains for minutes, and strike zone becomes crater field where everything is destroyed. The NVA assault shatters as units disintegrate and soldiers flee in panic while survivors are broken with shell shock incapable of coherent fighting. By noon, NVA are withdrawing from all sectors as attack has failed catastrophically, costing over 2,000 killed and 3,000 wounded, with tanks destroyed and equipment abandoned, and their offensive capability is exhausted with nothing remaining for another attack. The initiative has shifted as ARVN have won by surviving and holding and refusing to break, demonstrating that courage combined with devastating airpower can defeat superior numbers when soldiers refuse accepting defeat. The relief and legacy. May 15th brings relief as ARVN columns break through from south, with 21st Division bringing fresh troops and tanks and artillery up Route 13 after fighting through blocking positions to open the road for supply trucks. The siege is broken after 66 days, and An Loc is relieved with defenders able to be reinforced and rotated while wounded can be evacuated, and the nightmare is ending. June 18th marks official end as NVA withdraw, completely pulling back to Cambodia to recover after disastrous defeat, and the siege is over with An Loc secure as Easter offensive failed in this sector. ARVN casualties reach approximately 5,000 killed and wounded, with 5th Division losing over half its strength, though these would have been higher without air support. The soldiers proved they could fight and hold and win when properly supported and well led. NVA casualties are estimated at 10,000 killed and 15,000 wounded, representing 80% casualty rates that destroyed divisions that limped to Cambodia, remaining incapable of operations for months. Civilian casualties exceed 5,000 dead and 10,000 wounded from 15,000 population. The city is destroyed with 90% of structures damaged, but An Loc stands, and that represents victory. An Loc changed the war by proving Vietnamization could work when ARVN receives adequate air support and competent leadership. President Nixon used An Loc extensively in speeches pointing to victory as validation of policies, gaining enormous political benefit. General Le Van Hung becomes national hero, earning promotion and decoration, continuing to serve until 1975 when Saigon falls and Hung is offered evacuation but refuses, choosing to stay, and on April 30th, hours before NVA tanks enter the palace, he shoots himself rather than surrender, with his legacy remaining the defence of An Loc. An Loc demonstrated that air power proves decisive when applied continuously, with B-52 strikes preventing NVA from concentrating because they were killed in assembly areas. Logistics determine outcomes as ARVN was supplied entirely by air for 60 days in system that worked because enough supplies got through. Leadership matters at every level, from Hung through all commanders who led by example, earning respect that enabled obedience even in desperate circumstances. The veterans remember with refugees across America and France and Australia, telling stories and remembering comrades while honouring dead through reunions. And 5th Division Association meets annually to ensure sacrifice is not forgotten. The survivors, now in 70s and 80s, find memory remains fresh because time does not erase combat memories, and they are witnesses carrying history forward by ensuring An Loc is not forgotten. 66 days from April to June 1972, when An Loc held while 5th ARVN Division fought finest battle in South Vietnamese history against tanks and artillery and human waves while surrounded and supplied only by air, holding in rubble while refusing to surrender as city was destroyed. Winning with American airpower and courage born from knowing defeat means losing everything. And in holding, they saved Saigon while proving Vietnamization could work when properly supported. The siege that succeeded and the victory that mattered even, though history largely forgot the soldiers who made it possible through their sacrifice.